Hello, everyone. This is Jeff with We the Individuals, and I'm with a gentleman who needs no intro, but for those who don't currently know him, he is currently the executive editor of Laissez-Faire Books, as well as author of books such as Bourbon for Breakfast, Living Outside the Status Quo. Ladies and gentlemen, the bow tie wearing gentleman, Jeffrey Tucker. How are you today, Jeffrey?
I'm doing just fine. Jeff, it's really good to see you. Last time you and I met up was in my hotel in Salt Lake City, as I recall.
That is correct. We had a nice bottle of wine, had a nice sit down, actually.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, actually. It
It
was a
was.
good
It was a good day. So speaking of which, since Salt Lake City, you've been doing a little bit of globetrotting since our interview in Salt Lake City. So just for people who are watching, where were some of the places that you went and events that you took part of?
Right. So immediately after Salt Lake, I took a red eye to Atlanta, and that was a kind of a crazy experience. And then changed terminals and went to the international terminal and took a flight to Rome, immediately. And then arrived in Rome, however many hours later that is, in the early morning, so I had a full day ahead of me. I'm a little get confused a little bit about time, so I'm not sure if I missed one night or 2 nights sleep. I don't actually
Right.
know. But it was quite the event. And I was in Rome for a full week. And I was speaking at a sort of Vatican-backed conference on liturgy, but in particular I addressed the whole question of intellectual property
Right.
over music. And so that was an interesting event. Met a lot of high church officials, and I had a chance to get behind the Swiss Guards and tour some of the Vatican, which is the offices of the Vatican. You imagine them as being opulent and gorgeous and the greatest things ever, but it's more like a 1950s public school classroom. Actually, I was a little bit taken aback by that, just how underpaid and everybody is, and how few access to resources they have. I spent a lot of time with the choir director of the Capella Julia,
Wow.
and that was an interesting sort of look into the heart of how it all happens. And actually, it's quite plain and sort of mundane. It's very unlike what I expected. But Rome is an interesting city. I was ready to go by the time it was my time was up. I think I was there 5 or 6 days, and this is a city that completely lives off consumer dollars. There's no real capital-intensive production going on anywhere in the town. And if that ever dried up, the whole place would just collapse. It was interesting. There were fascinating features of it. One was the pervasiveness of pirate goods, which I was
Yeah.
really interested in, to see just how many street merchants are dealing with pirated products, just as a matter of course. I mean, you can't get away from them anywhere in Rome, which is great. And people, are clearly able to distinguish, the counterfeits, so-called, from the real thing, and everybody's happy with it. And it reminded me of just how much of the world's economy is actually based on these kind of violations of intellectual property. That's just essential. So then I went from there to Brussels, and then there back again to Vegas, and I was there for a week for a Freedom Fest.
Freedom
And
Fest, yeah.
that was a good event. 2,500 people this year, just wild and interesting and fascinating, and then on to Toronto and back again. I think I've got a train coming through. If you hear that,
Yeah, I do actually.
yeah, I'll just let it run if you don't mind.
No, that's fine actually. Out of the places that you did go to, which one was your favorite?
Of everywhere I went.
Yeah, was it Rome
Um,
or Vegas?
yeah, I wouldn't say Rome. I really enjoyed Freedom Fest a lot, but the event that I think left the biggest impression on me was held about an hour outside of Toronto at an institute called at a small bed and breakfast with a huge property, a big lake house, and there was a lot of camping going on. So the Institute for Liberal Studies in Canada, I think it's
Yeah.
based in Toronto, sponsored the thing. There were about 100 people there, and mostly Canadians, but also others. I gave the evening lecture, at the main event. But it was just really interesting to me to get a chance to spend a little more in-depth time with a lot of sort of liberty-minded, liberty-loving people and see what they're thinking about, what they're talking about, their outlook for the future, and shared a lot of insights. Those kind of events, I think we have two of them in this country. We have the so-called Pork Fest in New Hampshire, which is kind of a camping sort of thing. This was a camping thing. I didn't camp. I stayed at the house, but a lot of people brought tents and things. So there's Pork Fest, and then I'm going to Libertopia, I guess, later this month, where I'll be the MC of their kind of event in Southern California. But I'd never been to anything like that before. And I thought a lot about its implications. And I never really thought of libertarians as being anything other than an intellectual movement. People reading books and talking about ideas, and all that's fine and important and crucial and really the core. But what these events underscore for me is that I think what we're seeing is the development of a new social movement also.
Yeah.
One that's kind of developing the structures of a new society that exists both in real time at these events, but also continues to exist after the events in the cloud through digital media. And if you think about that, that's an extremely important step. It's not just enough to be an intellectual movement. You do need these kind of personal connections and the development of real institutions. The sharing of ideas never ends with just the ideas. It results in new businesses and new associations, new websites, and tense friendships that last over a long period of time. And that's very exciting to me because it's like the development of a new subculture that's very diverse. It's diverse in its intellectual outlook, and it's diverse in its kind of cultural style. So at the campground, and outside of Toronto in Canada, I was certainly the only one in a coat and tie the entire time, And people have different likes and dislikes in terms of music and just lifestyle generally. But it's kind of cool because the heterogeneity of the group underscores to everybody who's there the prospects of love of liberty causing people to advantage. So I think being in those settings in a strange way reminds us of how a free society can work. So our differences are not a problem. It permits people with differences to get along and new ways to their mutual advantage. So I think these kinds of events underscore that and make you kind of optimistic for the future.
Yeah, I like what you said about that event, because I saw pictures of you, at the event in general. I saw you at the event, and what I really liked about it is that it seemed to be a very grassroots type of thing. And what you touched base about it being a social movement as well kind of elaborates and emphasizes that people as libertarians are not only, they're not only intellectuals, but they also have, here's a good way to actually phrase it, I know that you like technology and innovations, that we're all gizmos and gadgets, but we're all different ones. That we're all different people, but we have the same common goal and same insights and everything.
Yeah, I like it very much. I like discovering. I'm very curious about people in general, actually. What makes them tick, what they like, what music they like,
right?
Whether they decided to go to school, what social class they belong to, what is their relationship with with their attachment to the homestead, how often they've moved, whether they're planning to move out of the U.S. How do they see their career in relationship to their love of liberty? What's their perspective on politics? To what extent have they detached themselves from politics in order to just do their best to live a free life, and how, in particular, have they gone about living this freer life. So all these kind of things are very curious to me. So I like to getting to know lots of different kinds of people that appear at these events. And you know, the thing that draws people to liberty is very different. You know, there's some people who are just purely intellectual about it. Others, you know, find it outrageous to discover all the things that's stopping them in this world from doing the thing that they want to do, and fall in love with the idea of liberty just based on that sort of personal conviction.
Right.
So there's a lots of different reasons, or other people just found that, you know, the regimentation of society is just so belligerent that they couldn't fit into the central plan, and then, you know, decided they were going to stake out, you know, their own life on their own terms. But some are professionals, and some are more interested in sort of the more vagabondish, you know, kind of existence, you know, I guess you would say. And some are intellectuals, and others are designers and artists. Lots of different kinds of people. And everyone makes a contribution, really, and everybody has a kind of a different point of view. I was very impressed. The Canada meeting, you know, people are up very late discussing ideas, and, you know, there are the usual arguments about anarchism versus minarchism and that sort of thing, but there were some other, you know, more detailed debates about and discussions about religion, and, you know, I mean, just a wide amount of sharing. And it always impresses me when I find people who are able to have these sort of differences of opinion and yet have respect for each other's points of view.
Yeah.
And that happens every once in a while. And the cool thing about these kind of camping style experiences is that, you know, everybody's there for the duration, you know, so the proximity itself makes it less likely that people are going to flame each other, for example. You know, they're going to figure out ways to kind of talk to each other, and I think everybody benefits from that sort of experience. I'm not sure how old PorcFest is, but this
10 years.
10 years?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and this event in Toronto is in its 13th year, so these are not new, but and Freedom Fest is not camping, obviously, it's in a big casino, but a similar kind of environment, much larger. And then Libertopia, I think, was started just a few years ago. But what is new is the size of the attendance, the demand to attend them, the desire to kind of be there and be part of the group. I mean, basically what it comes down to is these days, libertarians really like hanging out with other libertarians, which is just kind of neat. And there's no necessary reason why that should be true, but, you know, it helps to find somebody who shares your certain suppositions about the world, you know, that love of liberty, that really conscious desire to do what you can in your own life to achieve your human rights and achieve your potential, despite a system that's basically urging you to fail. That does provide a certain social bond and mix between people.
Yeah, I like how you phrase that, where even you touch base on, you know, the typical minarchism versus anarchism debates, but it's those kind of events kind of seem nice to be able to set that aside and, you know, focus on the big picture of liberty.
Yeah, that's right. And my talk Saturday night, I mean, it was not a conventional talk at all. I decided to kind of get beyond the basics of, you know, my usual themes about, you know, the merits of a commercial society and, you know, enterprise and creativity as a kind of a source of prosperity and defense of consumer culture and these kinds of things that I love to talk about so much. And instead, I just kind of went to the big picture worldview issue about, you know, what is economics, where does it apply, where does it not apply, and why, in particular, the digital age in which information has been liberated from the prison of geography, what that implies about our role and about the future of human liberty itself. So I went into some detail about this and really took it to the stratosphere in terms of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently.
Now you touch base on IP in the Vatican, and I remember in Salt Lake City you said that you here in Salt Lake when you came to visit that you like hearing arguments about IP. So you know, on your travels, the Vatican or Toronto or Vegas or whatever, did you come across any argument that was like the trump card for pro IP, or anyone that was really difficult, or is it still or was it pretty easy to manage that?
Well, Jeff, I mean, what people often, no matter how much I write about this, no matter how much I talk about it, there's always going to be somebody in the audience who will have heard this argument for the first time.
Right.
And the first time they hear it, their first response is, well, why would anyone want to create in a world in which they can't own their ideas?
Yeah.
And that's always, the first instinct. And, I move with a series of arguments that I know, very well. First mover advantage, a kind of a natural market-based period of productivity, of profitability that comes with successful products, the difference between the authentic and the imitator, the pervasiveness of emulation and imitation as a natural part of social evolution, and creativity as being inspired essentially by the desire to do something new. Most creativity does not result in profits, only a tiny percentage of them do. And the sheer entrepreneurship of the piracy act to figure out which new thing to follow. And by the time that thing is revealed to you, the market is already pretty well set, with the first mover advantage and all these things. So, I kind of tend to deal with these things with examples that I hope can fit with what the person's thinking and saying. And I try very much to present IP as a kind of a form of mercantilism that's left over from 18th century. It's an industrial monopoly, in effect.
Yeah.
It's on government. But for libertarians in particular, and there were a lot of people in Toronto who were very much influenced by a philosopher, I think he's at the University of Toronto, I may be wrong about that, but his name is Jan Narveson, who wrote The Libertarian Idea and several other really important books, You and the State, and other things. He's a very important libertarian philosopher, had a huge influence over, I would say it's a dominant kind of influence over Canadian libertarians. You've never heard of him. It might be worth it to kind of look him up. Interesting guy, and I really like him. I had a chance to spend a lot of time with him and argue with him over some points of disagreement. He by the way, I think he leans towards being favorable towards intellectual property, as anybody would be if you hadn't really thought that much about it. But he calls himself a contractarian. Okay, so this contractarianism is the view that essentially anything's permitted as long as everybody party to the contract agrees to it. So he's basically an anarchist because, of course, the state itself would fall outside the bonds of contractarianism. Contractarianism, in the Narveson sense, would definitely require individual agreement. So there's no such thing as like a social contract because
right.
People are not actually agreeing to this thing. It's just a kind of a gauzy veneer that people put over the state to try to persuade you that it's actually a voluntary institution. Anyway.
Yeah.
So when it comes to IP, there's this very simple point to make to persuade a contractarian that there's a problem with it, namely that intellectual property always requires coercing third parties who are not part of the original contract. So you and I might make a contract to share a certain idea.
Mm.
There's nothing wrong with that. We're not relying on IP. Intellectual property in order to do that, and you and I might successfully keep that a secret, and that's great. And we can say, oh, we have intellectual property over that. Isn't that great? And shake hands and just, be happy in our cool little monopoly of information. There's nothing contrary to freedom about that. Where intellectual property starts to actually pertain to this contract is if somebody else came up with the same idea, then you and I look at each other and go, what is this guy thinking? he's not permitted to have the same thought we have. And then we get the state involved to somehow coerce him or prevent his idea from coming to market or from having any real embodiment in any physical form or marketable form at all. That's what IP does. It always and everywhere coerces third parties. In fact, that's its whole purpose. That's its core structure. That's its bare functioning. If it didn't coerce third parties, it would just be part of human life. You know, what makes it intellectual property is that you're preventing other people from coming up with the same ideas that you hold. So it necessarily contradicts contractarianism. So I always offer that argument out there, and then it takes a little bit of explaining. Patent and trademark and copyright always violate third-party rights. It takes a little bit of thinking through, but once a person does think about it, then eventually you come to the conclusion that this stuff is hopeless and a species of mercantilism and one of the worst aspects of statism, because it intervenes in the realm of ideas, which is in a sense more aggressive, more damaging than even intervening in the realm of taxation or something like that. So, but it's not obvious when a person first starts to think about it. It takes a little bit of time. Maybe, you know, for me it took me 6 years to figure this all out. Other people it might take, you know, a few weeks or a few months or whatever. So some people can get it immediately, but I always figure it's a good sign when people are asking the question, because it means they're thinking about it. You know, yeah. And I have full confidence that if a person thinks about the subject enough and doesn't have a vested interest in the retention of the intellectual property system, that he or she will definitely come to the point of view that IP has no place in a free society at all.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me, because I think it was, as an anarchist, it was the last thing that I was kind of grasping to was IP, because, you know, when I first came across IP, I was like, well, why are we even arguing about intellectual property? It's my right, it's my idea. But then, you know, reading articles like yours and Kinsella, it only took me literally a couple weeks until I actually let go of, you know, advocating for intellectual property, just because I think it's kind of like reminds me of, you know, people, and how sometimes people actually cling on to the state. How, like, you know, if we were to say privatize the roads, everyone's used to the state actually handling the roads. But with intellectual property, I think we're all used to hearing the arguments for intellectual property and are used to it, but it's just it's not that way when it's, you know, against IP laws.
Yeah, we live in a world where it's actually interesting. We hear a lot about patents and copyrights and trademarks and things like that, and they're very high profile. But actually a very small fraction of goods and services are protected under IP at all, and fewer all the time. I mean, it's funny because it's a very important issue, but it actually pertains to very little bit of our economic lives at all.
Right.
I was in, and I always run across these examples. I was just last night at the store trying to find some, because I needed a bar of soap. Okay, no big deal. And my favorite soap had the name brand, and it was like $1.17. And then there was the you know, the off-brand, the store brand, which is the same thing. You know, it had the same kind of packaging, the same kind of marketing, so it was obvious that it's the same thing. But it was, you know, 90 cents. So you're going to save a little bit of money buying it. And I guess I'm inclined always to buy the name brand. You know, I don't know why. This time I decided to buy the off-brand and just kind of check it out. But I stood there kind of being amused by this. And I think one of the fallacies that people make is that when you see two similar products, one, you know, clearly the first mover. And by the way, the soap is not protected by any intellectual property at all, right? I mean, it's a very old product, so there's no way. So you've got a kind of a nice competitive environment in the market for soap. But I think what we tend to assume is that only one brand can win, and that's just a really bad assumption. It's just not true. You can have many different brands of the same thing, and they can all achieve profitability together. There's nothing wrong with that. You might buy the off-brand this time and the name brand next time, and who knows what the person behind you and the person behind them will do. So you can have a success of the original alongside the success of the copies. There's nothing to stop that. And the success of one doesn't necessarily come at the expense of the other. Sometimes the pirate sells the real good. You might buy a fake Gucci bag this year, and then then you finally enter into professional life and suddenly look at it and go, yeah, I'm not so sure about this fake bag, and then go out and buy the real one and have a new sense of pride about it. So it's all kind of a process, and there's not necessarily one single winner. There might be a dominant market player, but that doesn't mean everybody else is going to be unprofitable. So there's nothing wrong with all these things circulating simultaneously. And Bastiat writes about a period of profitability that comes after an innovation before it's competed away. But it's not necessarily true that the profitability is going to be competed away completely. A first mover might benefit for generations, really. I mean, I think of something like Bayer Aspirin. Okay, so Bayer Aspirin hasn't been under any kind of protection in 100 years or whatever. I mean, I forget now when aspirin was invented. If it ever was in production, I'm not entirely sure. But anybody can make Bayer Aspirin. But Bayer is still the leading brand out there. Making the same product for 80 years or however long, and still the #1 player out in the business because people figure they can trust it, even though full well intellectually that there are many, many other brands of aspirin that are essentially identical or even better. The name brand of Bayer, compels us in some way. So the period of profitability of the first mover in any market can last an unlimited amount of time, actually, in real life.
That's true. Now, to kind of switch gears, as many people know, and you kind of touch base on it, that you're, everyone practically knows that you're an advocate of Bitcoin plus fan of technology, gadgets, and gizmos. Now, while traveling, did you come across any new innovations that you didn't see before your travels that you're kind of excited about, that makes you more happy about the market in general?
Yeah, I don't. Of course, I'm always intrigued by things like showers and toilets and stuff like that, because this country has some of the worst in the world, and in Toronto, I noticed that the toilets are much more sophisticated than in the U.S. and I don't understand this. I'm assuming they don't have the strict regulations on toilets that we have in the U.S. because what's actually happened in Canada, and the same thing in Brussels, and same thing in Rome, even as backwards as Rome is, and it really is backwards. There's market innovations that conserve your water, so that you have two types of flushes, and which in the U.S. is just kind of not very well known. And there's no reason why that innovation wouldn't have come to the U.S. and become just normalized, except for the fact that the government intervened and stopped the toilets from functioning properly. It's just crazy. And the showers, of course, in Canada were just fabulous. I mean, it was like, the old days. Or, in my own case, I hack all my showers, so I get a good shower regardless. But but Americans are no longer used to having, decent showers. So there's many things in Canada. I was very impressed at technology. Oh, the other thing that was interesting, and let's think about this. Oh, I forgot to mention the fact that, I'm not sure if I mentioned that I was in Vancouver for a week. Vancouver is absolutely one of the most fabulous places on the planet Earth. I had never really been outside and walked around that city. I've been there before, but this is my first time to really kind of get to know the place. And I was just blown away at its sheer beauty. And some of the most privileged people in the world live in Vancouver. I mean, it's just really a fabulous place. But I think it was in Vancouver, and it might have been true actually in Toronto too, that everywhere you went, restaurants and things, the waitstaff would not take your credit card back with them to the cashier or whatever, and then bring it back to you to sign, just like we're used to in this country.
Yeah.
They all had mobile, portable
Oh.
swiping units, and this is just considered normal. Tap tap tap, swipe. Do you want to add a tip? Yes. Do you want it to be a percentage, or do you want it to be a strict amount? You make a choice, or maybe not a choice at all. You sign it. Out rolls your receipt. You take it with you, and you're gone. And this was true all over Vancouver and all over Toronto, and even to some extent, I saw this in Rome too. And I don't know why, but I mean, maybe there are places in the U.S. where this is going on. I think I've seen it at an Apple store or something like that. But it doesn't seem very common, and I'm not entirely sure why. But I thought that was a really cool innovation, because when you're ready to pay, you pay, and there's not this kind of long wait, to flag down the waitress and they carry it away or whatever. No, it's just it happens all right there. So that was kind of neat. I don't know if that's coming to the U.S. or what. It was the same thing with taxi cabs, all over Vancouver and Toronto. That they're very wired in a big way.
Yeah, that it's funny that I remember you talking on Stossel about the toilets and the showers actually, and it reminded me of you hear people hacking music CDs, downloading them, or movies, or etc. But you rarely hear about people hacking showers. That's just amazing how much government has even gotten involved in their showers and toilets.
Oh yeah.
We have to hack.
Yeah, and people don't recognize just how much our lives are. Our lifestyles are sort of reduced by all these government regulations. I mean, they're absolutely everywhere. So thank goodness we have different regions of different countries and things like that, so we can continue to see what prosperity looks like in a particular sector. That we might not be experiencing it here. So one of the fun things I did when I was in Toronto is after my speech, because it was all about the digital world and why it matters and why it should make us very bullish for creativity and human prosperity. I talked about the movement of money itself out of the realm of physicality and government control into the cloud, and described Bitcoin and its protocol and its meaning, everything. But I offered in the course of my speech to give Bitcoin away to anybody who wanted to try it. And so in the course of the weekend, I probably gave away some portion of Bitcoin to about 30 different people. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, that does sound fun.
Yeah, that was really fun. And
you touched base on the next question. You have that cryptocurrency coming up in October. Is that specifically about Bitcoin, or is that more currencies?
Well, we're going to talk about other altcoins too, so-called altcoins, but mainly the focus will be on the gold standard of cryptocurrencies, which is Bitcoin. And that's an interesting conference because you can go to it. It's cryptocurrencycon.com. So I think it's the second link under if you Google cryptocurrency, I think it's the second or third link up there. So it's October 5th in January. And that conference came about because I got really interested in the subject, and I was puzzled about why there weren't more. I mean, there was a big cryptocurrency conference on Bitcoin. I guess earlier this year in California. There was one in New York a couple of weeks ago. But the thing is that they seem to be very specific to the payment industry. That seems to be the big issue. They focus on merchant craft and practice, which is wonderful. But what I wanted to do with this conference in the Southeast was kind of integrate into discussions about payment systems and modernizations of exchange and internationalization, but integrate it within a framework of monetary theory and legal analysis of law, of the institutions of law and history, which hasn't really been done yet. So, in other words, I'd like to see, the geeks talking to the intellectuals who are also talking to the merchants, and all of us coming together to discuss the future of cryptography and cryptocurrency. So that's the reason for this event.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be fun because, I mean, especially with me, and I mentioned this in the interview, I'm pretty new to Bitcoin. I think it'd be really nice for people like me, or even anyone in general, just to find out, if you want to start using Bitcoin, how do I go out and buy something? Because you mentioned that in other countries, like I think it was Argentina, that Bitcoin is pretty big there for like getting apartments and flats. But for some people like in the U.S., we're so used to the dollar, that'd be nice for people to actually know more about it and know how to use it, so it sort of pushes Bitcoin even further.
Yeah, it's the use that's the critical thing, Jeff. I mean, whenever I use Bitcoin, I get all excited all over again. And if I go for a few days without using it, well, then it becomes a little more abstract. But it's in the use that the brilliance is truly revealed. When I was in, let me think about this a second. Yeah, it was in Las Vegas. I went to lunch with a bunch of Bitcoiners, and the bill came. And of course, this restaurant's not accepting Bitcoin. But we all had various problems. I mean, some people had cash, some people didn't, some people needed to go to the cash machine. Some person volunteered to put it all on his credit card, and then we're going to pay him back in drinks or whatever. And so, the usual confusion you have over the bill at the end of any dinner. And so at some point I said, hey, wait a minute, we're all Bitcoiners here. How about somebody throw down his credit card, and then we all just pay our portion to him in Bitcoin? And I was like, oh, of course, we forgot, right? We've been talking about Bitcoin for an hour, but we forgot about it. And so sure enough, that's what happened. The guy threw down his credit card, and we all just, calculated what we owed him and settled up our debts in, 10 seconds. It was boom, boom, boom. It was all done.
Right. Now, what we've kind of been talking about is kind of seems like our dependency or how we're used to the state being involved, which actually leads me to my next question, which was actually, or not really question, but thing that actually I've been thinking about since we've talked in Salt Lake is I was watching this interview with you and Amanda Billyrock where, it was when right after she moved to New Zealand, and she was describing her registering her scooter. And anyhow, the process was so quick versus the DMV here in the States, where I think she said it went minutes. And, after seeing that and remembering what you said, it really sort of hit home, because you have the DMV, which we have been used for years. And if you're to say to someone, let's privatize the DMV, you're going to get a mob of people questioning and ridiculing the idea. But what Amanda and what you told me about the actual what you told me in Salt Lake kind of makes me realize that if we look at examples like her in New Zealand, that those types of things can be done outside the state. It can be done in the market. And it also reminded me how I mentioned to you that, do you think it's kind of silly when people bring up flying cars? Would we have flying cars by now? And you mentioned something that we actually don't know. That's the beauty of the market, is that the uncertainty. If we can have things like me and you talking online, her registering a scooter in 5 minutes, then we don't know what the market can actually bring us.
No, and it's. I'm glad you brought this up. It's just something about we don't know what we don't know. I mean, this is the problem. So part of the job of a person who accepts and believes in the idea of human liberty is to imagine that which we can't really imagine. You always have to hold out the possibility that there's lots of possibilities that we're not seeing that can't be realized. We don't know in particular what they are. I talked to a person the other day who got her first iPhone, okay, iPhone 5. It was an iPhone 5. And she had been using an iPhone 4 for about, 18 months or something like that. And so skipping that in-between upgrade from 4S to 5, just straight 4 to 5. And I said, what do you think about 5? She said, oh, I just can't believe how amazing it is. It's so fast, all the apps work, there's all these new functionalities. I feel like I'm in a different world, and I can't even, I don't know what I did without it. I said, well, were you happy with your 4? She said, oh yeah, I was very happy with my 4. I thought it did everything that an iPhone was supposed to do. But putting the 5 in my hand, and after about 10 minutes of use, she suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I had no idea what the potential of a smartphone could be. Now, this is a relatively small upgrade in the scheme of history, right, from iPhone to iPhone 5. But in terms of the user, it's a gigantic thing. And so I said to her, what would you say if somebody came along and said, okay, you can't use your iPhone 5 anymore, you've now got to go back and revert to your iPhone 4. She said, oh, that would just be terrible. I can't even imagine I could ever go back. And this is very interesting because 2 weeks ago, she was perfectly happy with her iPhone 4 because she
Yeah.
didn't imagine the possibilities that were available. Now that she's imagined it and seen it and participated in it, there's very low tolerance for the idea of reverting back. There would be great consternation and dissatisfaction. So this is all kind of intermixing of the element of surprise in the world with our own human psychology. Human beings are very reluctant to this idea of reverting back to the future. We don't like it, and we're not going to tolerate it. And yet, if you look at government policy today, almost everything they do is designed to kind of pull us back, to revert us, to stop the latest development, to restrict our consumption, to make the new features, you know, compromised in some way, and to constantly sort of drive us back in history. I mean, this is the theory and the import of virtually everything government does these days from a regulatory point of view. So it raises the question, you know, why do we put up with it? I don't think that human beings will long put up with that, actually. I mean, it's an implausible kind of thing for people to go backwards in time. We always want to go forwards. And why is that? Well, I think the reason is that it has something to do with the structure of the world. You know, there's unlimited wants. And all our wants can never be fulfilled. And yet, that doesn't get rid of our wants. We're always striving for new things. The market is the only institution anybody's ever come up with that caters to that need, that syncs up the efforts of producers with the desires of consumers to give us actual economic progress. Yeah. So it's a tragic thing that we live in times where everything is kind of warring against that. You know, it's always trying to pull us back in time. So what do we have to do? We have to basically figure out ways around it. We have to deal with this labyrinth of regimentation and control all around us, and break out of it and break free of it, you know, in every conceivable way. This is exactly the kind of situation it was under communism for everybody living in Eastern Europe. You just kind of recognize that the law is the enemy, and if you comply with everything the state is asking of you, you're basically going to die.
Right.
You'll be poor, you will suffer, and then you will die. And that's an intolerable situation. So what you have to do is just decide you will not comply. You don't want to get caught, but you try not to comply. And this is what everybody did under the totalitarian state. You know, you just kind of come to terms with it. And increasingly, I think in this country and the U.S., we're coming to this point now too, where it's gradually dawning on people that this is the new reality we have to deal with. And my evidence for the fact that this is dawning on people would point to popular entertainment, fiction and movies, which are increasingly dominated by these themes of artificial restrictive environments where there's tons of rules and a distorted reality and things, and people who find themselves captive of those systems and nonetheless spend all the time trying to break out of them. These are structures created by human beings that are designed to thwart the ambitions of other human beings. These stories are all about human beings pushing through nonetheless. And I'd point to shows like Breaking Bad, Orange is the New Black, Boardwalk Empire. There's a whole slew of these kind of shows that are coming out. And now, Jeff, this is a special kind of fiction because it's different from fiction of the past. In the 19th century, fiction usually dealt with things that were more natural barriers, like disease or bad weather, crop failure, you know, the grapes of wrath, moral upheaval, like you get in a lot of the Victorian literature. All the drama of literature of the past would, you know, centered around endogenous barriers to human progress. Endogenous in the sense that they're part of the structure of nature. But nowadays, you're seeing more and more dramas that are dealing with the contemporary reality, which is exogenous controls on us, man-made controls that we're just desperate to break free from. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever I actually see things like, I'm not sure if you saw that new innovation. It looks like a spider web, a cast. Also, when I see, so it's not your typical shell, but it's actually a one so you can scratch or whatever. Also, things like the 3D printer, or even your gizmo you showed me, that little tiny modem that you're carrying around in your pocket.
Yeah,
It's
my
things,
little internet hub,
yeah,
right?
those things like that make me even more excited about, that the actual how obsolete the state is becoming, in the
Yes.
long term when
You
those
know,
things happen despite the state, and imagine if we had it without the state, what is possible?
and this is a very interesting thing when you think back to history. This is a new realization. Like everybody knows that today the state doesn't come up with anything on its own. Most of what it does is it prevents us from using and controlling those things that private entrepreneurs are coming up with. But this is very different from like our parents. You know, the big event in their lives was the moonshot. Okay,
Yeah.
so like the government built a rocket ship that took some people to the moon and they traipsed around in the dirt and came back. Okay, it's pretty spectacular. It was the greatest innovation of that generation. It came about through government. So that left this kind of impression that if you really want spectacular things to happen, you better let the state handle it. Um, which is a very bad lesson, actually, to take from public affairs. But we don't have any examples like that around us at all. I mean, all the great, great things that are happening. By the way, the moonshot, that would have eventually happened through, private technology anyway. It's not anything unique to the state. But then if you go back a generation before that, what was the most spectacular use of technology in the, say, 1940s? It was that ghastly, horrifying mass murder weapon called the nuclear bomb,
Yeah.
which was used to obliterate, whole populations of people at the end of wartime. So, you had a kind of very negative association with technology. And is this what progress looks like? Mass murder is this what it's about? Maybe we should turn against it. So, and then 25 years later, we had this moonshot. Like, well, not all technology is bad. Look, here's a couple of guys who went to the moon. So these are the kind of the big cultural symbolisms associated with technology in the latter half of the 20th century. But if you move to the 21st century, our associations with technology are good. They're human service because they're coming about from the market. And they're always associated with private entrepreneurship and decentralized systems of knowledge, as Hayek would say. So that's a very nice cultural message, actually. It's a very nice economic and cultural truth that's being pointed to in our times.
Right.
So that makes it different from anything our parents or grandparents ever went through, I think.
My last question, and I'll let you continue being an enemy of the state as you do so well, is I forgot to ask you this when I saw you in Salt Lake City, and I was kind of kicking myself. I also spoke with Robert Murphy on this with my interview just last week, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Robert Higgs's closing statement at Mises Institute last week, but he was, anyway. But people will say if we have is about how you are for systems. Now, people will say if we have enough people like us in office, we can reduce it. But they'll say, how can we implement change if we don't have enough people like us in office? Now, I know how you feel for systems, but as far as change, outside the system, how would you say the best way of doing that is? Is it through what you and I are doing right now, conferences, or, counter to the voting the right guy in, because you touched base on that in the interview, so we don't have to go there again, but doing it outside the system, how would you say is the most efficient way is? Because Robert Higgs and Murphy kind of, they aren't for systems either, but there's still some uncertainty on doing it outside the system too.
Yeah, well, the first thing to realize is that the system does not consist of politicians. The system consists of mainly bureaucrats who are enforcing laws that they did not make, that have always existed there, that they may not like, but they nonetheless go along with it. I highly recommend the show Orange is the New Black because it's a story about jail. And one of the things that is funny about it is that nobody believes in the system. Like, nobody. Okay, so like the guards are all trading with the prisoners. They're all violating the rules. Every one of them has got some compromise. And they all know that each other is violating the rule. The warden is the same situation. He knows that the guards are liars and are participating in various corrupt activities, and the supervisor of the wardens are also engaged in this kind of corrupt. So everybody's corrupt, but it's intriguing because the system continues to survive, right? It's all intact, even though nobody actually believes in it. So this is an instructive example because I think in this show, Orange is the New Black, you get a kind of microcosm of society. That's the situation we're in socially right now. Like, everybody's participating in the system, but hardly anybody actually believes in it, but nobody knows what to do about it. So I think the answer here is to strike at the core vulnerability of these systems of bureaucratic management that run by sheer regulatory inertia. And its place of vulnerability is in its sheer inflexibility, in its incapacity for dealing with change. That's what subverts bureaucracies. That's what subverts systems of jail and regulations and regimentation. When something new and spectacular happens that it doesn't know what it is or what to do about it, then the system begins to break down. And I think we've begun to see a breakdown of the system over the last 15 years, especially when we've seen such explosive entrepreneurship and creativity taking place. The state doesn't essentially know what to do about it at all. The market moves much faster than the regulations can. All the regulations all pertain to the past, and they try to preserve the past. The market pertains to the future, and they try to make a new future. So it seems to me the best way that we can go about, and the most successful way we can go about promoting human liberty is simply continue the race and outrun the state ever more. And that's what hits at its core vulnerability. I don't believe we're going to get rid of this planning apparatus, this Leviathan state as it exists. I don't believe that. I think what we're going to do is systematically work on creating ever more new and beautiful worlds that will eventually make the planning apparatus of the past, which is essentially half century old, just cause it to obsolete itself. So in this prison-like environment, for example, if everybody's breaking free of it, eventually the guards have nobody to guard. The wardens, they all suddenly realize their jobs are ridiculous and pointless because there's nothing really to rule anymore. Everybody's gone. Everything's finished. There's a new world that's being made, and the old world is going to crumble for sheer lack of energy and relevance to anybody's life. So, as individuals and libertarians, we all have different talents and different abilities and different callings. I would suggest to people that you find out what that is, whether it's in music or filmmaking or writing or commentary or webmastering, or you're a college professor, whatever the thing is that you feel called to do, jump in there, do it extremely well, use all the most advanced technologies, always look for ways to improve and serve others, and by doing that itself, it's an act of subversion. It's a revolutionary act in a way, and every time you make progress in your own life and you help other people whose lives you touch make progress, you're engaged in a kind of subversion of the system of command and control, and you take those marginal steps towards a better world. And if we all work together, I think we're going to continue to see dramatic change within our lifetimes.
That's a good answer. I also, in this, I think to give it to fair, in all fairness to people who do think inside the system will work. Robert and I were speaking about this, like for instance Ron Paul, and you talked about him last time, that people like him and Ron Paul and Rand Paul, Justin Amash, they have their place as well, because as skeptical as I am as doing it within the system, at least they're bringing ideas to, you know, people who are new to liberty. And as you mentioned in our interview last time, that as an anarchist, you kind of eventually need to step outside that. But at least it's people like them that are bringing those ideas to the national platform. Because if it wasn't for the Justin Amashes or the Rand Pauls or Ron Pauls, many people would not even hear of, you know, the Hayeks and the Jeffrey Tuckers.
Yeah, I think it's true. And my complaint with people who get so attached to this world is when they claim it's the only way out, and which I don't believe. I don't think that we need to put all of our hope in the political process. If there is any hope in the political process, it's probably a very small one. But I get annoyed when people look to others who are taking other paths and say, "Oh, you're not doing anything of any importance. I'm playing the real game. You know, I'm getting my hands dirty." Well, everybody has a role to play, and I don't think that politics is the only path forward. I think it's actually the least promising path forward. I don't want to put down those people who do it, because I think, you know, they feel a calling themselves. Certainly Ron Paul does, and certainly Rand Paul, you know, feels that calling. I'm going to take a wait and see attitude on all this stuff, but on the other hand, in our own lives, we don't have time to wait. I mean, if you're holding out for a politician to give you your rights and your liberty, then you're making a mistake. I mean, the time to act is now.
I think H.L. Mencken is still waiting on that right person to come into.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, fully 100 years. Right.
But as usual, you're always insightful, and it's been a very great pleasure talking with you again. So I wanted to thank you for taking your time out of your schedule to do that with me again. It's always a pleasure.
And thank you for using this cool live Google Hangout technology. It's a lot of fun. I think it worked well. Yeah.
I'm really glad the government brought it to us so we can actually use
it. Take care, my friend.
Yeah, you too. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.